I think there is an equal influence, arguably, in this movie of just like the teenage rom-com genre of film. And this movie is embracing a lot of the tropes of those movies and remixing them through the Shakespearean lens and finding something new there. And I think that's what makes it feel so fresh is it's like two things that don't feel like they should go together at all, and yet you can find a really fun way to bring them together.
Welcome, friends, to episode 337 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And this week we discuss Gil Junger's 1999 film, 10 Things I Hate About You. What a time capsule we just experienced.
Yeah.
We are both of this generation. This
Right.
film came out in 1999, and I think like it's so nostalgic and it feels innocent and it feels like a time often for myself. I don't know if everyone else feels this way, but pre 9/11 just feels like a totally different era.
Sure.
And this is in keeping with that. But I just think about how like these kinds of films don't get made anymore much. And this film released the same week as The Matrix.
Yeah.
And competed with it, was second in the box office to The Matrix, and did well. It still did well. And it was just a different era. And of course, like returning to Heath Ledger, seeing like his budding career and Julia Stiles. I think this was Heath Ledger's first American film.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah. It was so much fun. And I think like I have become exhausted maybe with the high school like sort of rom-com trope, but this still feels fun and fresh to me. And maybe there's a little bit of nostalgia goggles there. You take Shakespeare's work, you twist it, turn it into this high school thing, and make it more, especially with like Taming of the Shrew we talked about last week, is kind of mean-spirited and there's like a lot of misogyny that just doesn't work. And we were kind of conflicted about what Shakespeare was like attempting to do and kind of debating back and forth whether we thought it was like intentional or ironic and funny. But for some reason, this film works, and it's become a cult classic. Some of those iconic scenes from a rom-com, saw it in my research, lauded as like one of the most iconic rom-coms of all time. So what did you think about this, and what was your experience?
Have you seen this movie before?
I have.
Okay, so this was my first time. Watching it was a journey because it's a tough time right now, right? Like, we're living in a tough time in this country. There's a lot to be cynical about. Like, even before we were getting on, we were talking about how just like crazy it is looking at politics right now and everything that's going on. Yeah. And like, I sit down to watch this movie. It was a few days after Valentine's Day, when I ended up watching it. And it took me a little bit to like get into the right headspace. And I realized that I needed to like let go of the outside world worries for a little bit and just like allow myself to get caught up in a teen romance rom-com and actually embrace that and be okay with like this being the kind of movie I'm watching. That's where the joy of this is, and kind of let it lure me in, I guess. And I'm glad to say that once I sort of made that transition, this movie really works. Of course, a little dated in some ways. You know, whenever you have comedy, I feel like it's an ever-moving target of like what is actually funny and what feels like appropriate humor to have. It's trying to make social commentary comedy, which like also does not tend to age super well because that border moves over time.
It's attempting to be like feminist, or at least the main character is attempting to be like feminist for the 1990s, like 1999 specifically. And like maybe that doesn't feel far enough for us now.
No, it's quaint. It's quaint as hell. It's like, oh, look at her with her, like she thinks, you know, women deserve equal rights. How shrewish, you know? And it's not doing that, but like there's a little bit of like the movie does like tries very hard early on to like establish that she's a bitch, quote unquote, and like all the characters are like, she's so terrible, but it's like the stuff she's doing is so not in a line with that viewpoint. It's like she's just pointing out like very obvious things. I don't know.
And maybe in response to this movie or this type of movie, I look at her now and I think of like myself growing up.
Yeah.
This was what was cool. Like it became like the counterculture became cool, and like this character is like on the surface like not checking those boxes in terms of like being off-putting.
And honestly, I think there was a little bit of like having just read the play fucking with me, because the play, it's very much trying to establish the shrew as a shrew who needs to be tamed. And so when I went into this movie having not seen it before and knowing that it is an adaptation of Taming of the Shrew, that's the way everything was sort of playing for me. But like I realized kind of in retrospect that like just because they're having other characters comment on her and the way she's behaving in that sort of negative light doesn't mean that the movie actually wants us to perceive her that way. Because maybe like the movie is like saying like, isn't it kind of silly that they're perceiving her this way? Because I think you're right. What she actually is like a stand-in for a lot of women watching this movie. And I think a lot of, obviously a lot of people feel very nostalgic about this, but I think a lot of women who grew up in this time period feel very strongly about this movie too. And partially because they can see themselves in Julia Stiles' character, right? And the fact that she does push back against society's norms and stuff, it's like that's the stuff we were cheering on. Catherine, was it Katharina? However you say her name. We were saying like, go her. Like, why are they so mad at her for this? And I think this movie works in the same way. But anyway, all of that is to say, what I wanted to do today, I realized when I sat down, I was like, I don't want to be cynical. I want to embrace this movie where it's at. It's a feel-good, romantic movie with a heartthrob Heath Ledger in his first major role, but like
in America,
he kills it. He's so charismatic. It's tragic that we lost him as young as we did. So like it's so kind of beautiful and poignant to go back and watch him here. He's so full of life, and he would become such a big star. And it's cool to see this moment where he like really kind of leapt onto everybody's radar with, his big musical performance for one, and just really this role in general. And then overall, all of that is an extremely clever movie that is making really fun twists, and it's using the Taming of the Shrew plot in a really smart way, which we'll break it down as we go through. And how it uses a lot of the major plot points from that play to create a story that does feel appropriate for the era we're in, rather than something that's super dated to 1590s culture. And then beyond that, it just makes a bunch of cool references to Shakespeare, and I just thought it was clever, really overall, and it reminds me a lot of Clueless, the other movie that was very similar to this. And I feel like this movie probably owes a lot to it. I was looking, and like Clueless came out in 95. So they would have been fully aware of Clueless. And I'm like, I almost thought it was the same director. I had to look and see if it was, because I was like, damn, this does feel very similar to Clueless.
Well, I read that Karen McCullough-Lutz and Kirsten Smith, who were the screenwriters, actually watched Clueless, were inspired by it, and then set out to find other works of literature that could be adapted in the same kind of way. And they landed on Taming of the Shrew, and then this is what we get here. I wanted to shout out those screenwriters because I do think their voice is very much heard in this film.
Absolutely.
And, I think Gil Junger did a lot of good work, but I think in this case specifically, they really brought out.
It's a really smart screenplay for sure.
He says as much. Like he says, like the screenplay is what called him to the project. He initially like would not be interested in doing a high school sort of teen comedy kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then it just felt like it was really clever the way that it was navigating it. And I will say, like, some of it, like, I appreciate that they made attempts to say Shakespeare's lines, but the juxtaposition of 1990s high school with Shakespeare's like prose is quite interesting, and like sometimes when the actors maybe are like earlier in their careers, they're a bit younger, trying to deliver those lines. Sometimes it was clunky, sometimes it was clever, sometimes it really worked. But I think that that's not the point.
Well, I think they kind of get away with it because we all learned Shakespeare in high school. And so you can interpret that it's like they're parroting something they just learned about in their high school English class.
Sure.
And yes, maybe it's delivered a little bit awkwardly, but you would do that if you were to parrot it. And they even like really lampshade that with like the romance that plays out between two of the side characters who are like super into Shakespeare and like cosplaying as Shakespeare. It was really funny.
Actually really sweet, and maybe the best love story in the film, which we can dig into more. But we're talking about him. So Gil Junger began his career in Hollywood by attending the University of Texas at Austin's Radio, TV, and Film School. After graduating, he became a gopher. And then as far as his bios that I could find, it jumps immediately to him directing television. So I'm sure a lot of other things happened in between, but he moved into directing television and worked on series such as Dharma and Greg and Golden Girls. But he was nominated for an Emmy and a Directors Guild Award for directing the episode of Ellen in 1994, in which the lead character reveals that she's a lesbian. Obviously, like a massive moment.
Yeah, I didn't watch Ellen, but I'm sure if you did. that was
Yeah.
an important episode.
Well, just huge like cultural
Yeah.
moment as well. I think like having an out woman and like being portrayed in a show like that. I just know in '94 it was definitely that groundbreaking sort of time period. He broke into feature film directing with 10 Things I Hate About You in '99. He is an avid photographer, golfer, and musician, and is in a band called Midlife Crisis. He also started a company called the Breakthrough Company, which is sort of an acting workshop company, where based on his website, he draws on his vast entertainment experience to revolutionize the industry's approach to nurturing new talent. And then, you know, if you check out the website, he's got all kinds of people that he was helping find careers, such as Heath Ledger, Julia Stiles, many other people that he worked with early in their careers. And then his next film, Saving Number 7, shoots in spring of this year, followed by 10 Things I Hate About Dating, which shoots in 2026. So that's kind of crazy. We could get
Interesting,
like
because
I
I thought I saw something about there being a canceled sequel to this, but it sounds like maybe it's back in the works now.
I did see that there was a sequel that was supposed to be coming out in 2014 called 10 Things I Hate About Life. That was canceled. I didn't dig very much into that, but Gil Junger was attached to direct or produce in some capacity on that one as well. So yeah, interesting to note. I think it's one of those things that like I saw in my research, like, I don't know if you're familiar with the Kendrick and Drake beef that's been going on for
I've heard about it.
Yeah. So there was a period of time when Kendrick released a song and then Drake released in response a post, and the post was Julia Stiles' scene from 10 Things I Hate About You reading the 10 things she hates about Heath Ledger. And it was like the 10 things I hate. I guess he posted it as like a 10 things I hate about you, Kendrick sort of thing. So if you're in the hip hop beef.
Not clever. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Because the whole conceit of that is that at the end it turns and it's about how it's actually a love letter.
I guess I'm tipping my hand a little bit as far as where I land on the beef, but Drake's a bit corny and he posted that. So I don't think he really understood the context fully and just
Probably
thought
not.
that he was like, I hate you.
Yeah. Sounds like it. I don't know. I know nothing. I know next to nothing about it. I just learned a little bit about it with the Super Bowl stuff.
It's deep. It's a deep well.
Yeah.
So getting into the writing duo that I talked about, Karen McCullough and Kirsten Smith, they were inspired to write it after watching Clueless. They set out to find a classic play or myth to turn into contemporary movie, which eventually was Taming of the Shrew. Yeah. They wanted to write a
Which, by the way, we did that as a bonus episode, but it is now available on the main feed, like from the vault. And that episode's got a lot of downloads, actually. And people seem to really like that movie. We had a good time with it. Maybe we can return to that. But I'm curious to know how your thoughts are comparing these two movies to one another.
I'll just talk about it right now.
All right, go ahead.
And the 95 Clueless feels a bit more innocent 90s, kind of navigating a similar sort of like character as far as like a woman trying to find her way in the world.
And in case people don't know, that one was adapted based off of the Emma by Jane Austen novel.
Right. But in that, I found that it was a character who was like trying to find her voice, be individualistic in a sense, and like obviously that reflects the Jane Austen novel and what Emma represents to that story. But here, I felt like this is played up a little more for like the post. Like you're getting into like the 2000s a little bit, and it's like more aware of itself. It's got more edge to it, where like the character is like, kind of alternative and is. I think that like this film has that lean, and that I think took off in the 2000s and continued for a long time. The Clueless feels even more like a time capsule because it was sort of like super innocent, very preppy kind of 90s fare. In my estimation.
Yeah, it's interesting, man. I'd have to watch them both again closer together because it's like hard to remember exactly everything that goes on. But like, it seems to me like this movie took kind of a lot from what Clueless did, and then took it to another level. Because this movie to me feels more clever in the way in which it's using its sort of borrowed plot lines. And it is doing something a little more postmodern with it, like you're talking about, like maybe a little more self-aware. And we have a lot of that there, but it's like, but maybe because it was inspired by Clueless, it just feels very deliberate in a way. But there's a real charm to it. And once again, you can totally watch this movie if you know nothing about Taming of the Shrew and never know it's an adaptation and still enjoy yourself. And I'm sure many people did. But for people who are in the know, much like with Clueless, there's a lot of really cool little Easter eggs and nods, and we can sort of pick it apart like we're going to do.
Well, like I said in our last week's coverage, which I recommend, obviously we're a bit into this episode here, but I do recommend that you check that out if you want greater context for what we're talking about here. That was where we covered like the 1500s play, which I thought was a good conversation. But adapting it and moving it over here, I also wanted to note that the screenwriters wanted to write a strong-willed feminist character. So like you take Taming of the Shrew, which didn't work for us on many levels because of the fact that like by the end, spoiler for the book, or play in this case, the character seems broken and there's a level of possible sarcasm there. But in this film, it's very straight. Like, you know where the characters lie and kind of what their motivations are. And where they end up is very clear as well. And also, according to the screenplay writers, Patrick Verona was inspired by Judd Nelson's character in The Breakfast Club. So you get that sort of...
I can see that. Yeah, so one of the things that we honestly, because we're focusing so much on the Taming of the Shrew influence, I think there is an equal influence, arguably, in this movie of just like the teenage rom-com genre of film. And this movie is embracing a lot of the tropes of those movies and remixing them through the Shakespearean lens and finding something new there. And I think that's what makes it feel so fresh is it's like two things that don't feel like they should go together at all. And yet you can find a really fun way to bring them together. And that really works here. And yeah, absolutely. Like I saw a lot of big archetypal teen rom-com character types. And again, like I had to like shut off any cynical part of my brain that was like, oh, I'm tired of this, and realize that what is actually happening is clever and intentional. It's not like they're ignorant of what they're doing. They're doing it on purpose and to great effect, I think.
In today's day and age, it was quite funny. Like I still found myself laughing at a lot of the jokes. It was working for me.
I don't know if what caused this for me, but I did find that my enjoyment of the film was like a pretty steady incline as it went on. Like it started, like I was like, I don't know how much I want to like this movie, and then as it went on, it just got better and better, and then by the end, I was like fully bought in and enjoying myself. So I don't know why that happened, but that is my if you could graph my enjoyment of the movie, it definitely just kind of steadily increased as I went.
I do think that's part of the charm of the performers. I think that like the film, like you said, is very aware of what it's doing. It's a send up in a sense to some of the other like previous iterations of like Never Been Kissed and 16 Candles and those types of films like Clueless. But it's like really working with like what the structure of that is, and then like building that into the Shakespeare lore is pretty wild. And honestly, like it's cool because it shows like I think this was made for people in high school, right? Like if you're in high school and you're learning about Shakespeare and you're seeing these people that are relatable, like the way that makes you want to engage with Shakespeare and poetry and art and that, and like I like it makes that cool. While some people may be naysayers in high school and are against that kind of thing, I like something that's championing that in a fun way.
It makes me wonder, and I don't know if maybe this movie is a little too PG-13 to be like a movie you could show in school, but did anybody have a teacher who like taught Taming of the Shrew and then showed this film? Because like cool. That would have been really cool. I would have loved that as a student. And just like have a whole discussion about like what they're doing. I don't know. That's the ink to film class for you there.
For sure, yeah. If we were teaching in a high school somewhere, yeah. So Karen McCullough and Kirsten Smith, they would go on to write Legally Blonde and The House Bunny as well.
Wow, okay, Legally Blonde. And Legally Blonde's a really clever movie too.
Yep.
Yeah, I've seen that again. I don't know. It was still like probably like 10 years ago, but I saw it again like after the initial release when I had seen it, and like I remember thinking like this movie holds up pretty well, even for being pretty ridiculous sort of subject matter. It's still good. Yeah.
But it navigates a really interesting world of like women being able to embrace like the some of those stereotypical things while also being so individualistic. And I like the way it plays with that. And I think these writers were really onto something around this era.
It's one of those that when you said it, it's like it makes so much sense that these are the same writers.
Just talking about the cast a little bit, we talked about Heath Ledger. I read that like they saw like 1,000 different people, considering I think like Ashton Kutcher made it to the end. There's a few other people, but when Heath Ledger was brought into the casting session 3.5 weeks before filming began, he charmed Junger and was immediately cast. So just came in, worked. The Australian accent, he said it worked for him. It gave him like a level of danger, I guess.
Yeah,
and he is very charming in this film. Like the way that he puts himself out there in a lot of ways is so unlike the character from the Shakespeare story.
Oh no, yeah, he's unrecognizable from Petruchio.
Entirely changed in every way. So that's as we're talking about differences going forward. Petruchio basically like
He was terrible.
mentally, physically, and emotionally tortures Kat, and in this film that's not the case. He's actually like, as where he could start to torture her, he actually becomes sweet and sort of learns something about himself, and a lot of people go through some arcs that honestly found to be quite, I mean, while a little archetypal, were really fun. Another thing I wanted to note for you is that you're out there in the Pacific Northwest, which
Yeah.
is an amazing area, but all of this was shot on locations. None of it was shot on sets.
I had to look it up because I was like, I can't, like, what is this crazy high school they go to?
Yeah.
Like, can you imagine going to a high school like that? Like, that's really, you know, surreal. And then I look it up and it's a real fucking high school. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe you could actually go to this high school.
I read that it was like, I think it was built as like a railway station that was then converted
it was like a
to a high
hotel
school
at one point that then got converted into it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it's incredible looking. It's got, and what's
Beautiful.
cool is that it kind of reflects like a Shakespearean
sure,
sort of
yes.
architecture,
Yeah.
right? Like
It's like a
that's
castle.
it's awesome. It's awesome. But like the film starts, and again, this is another thing. It's like blending Shakespearean elements with like Pacific Northwest, like 90s culture. Like it starts out, you see the Space Needle, you know where you are right away. These amazing vistas of like mountains in the distance with like these bodies of water, and like the house that they live in is incredible. I mean, like, can you imagine how much that house is cost at this point?
Yeah, those are multi-million-dollar houses. Probably even then. Who knows now? But
Sure.
yeah, it's also like one of the most 90s openings to a movie ever. Like
For sure.
the way the text looks, and like playing, was it Bare Naked Ladies? That then transitions into what is it, like the Bad Reputation? I don't remember the name of that song, but when we get to her, and it's still fun. It's a fun opening,
and it tells you so much about a character so quickly, right? Like that song, Bare Naked Ladies song, came on. I'm like, this is a fun song. I like this song in the 90s. I like the song now. And listening to it, and then you're like in the car with the girls, and you're like, I don't know where this is going. And then she comes up, and it's like, I don't give a damn about my reputation. And it's like, that's a great introduction to a character. You just know where it's going, and I appreciate it for that reason. And it endeared me to that character right away too.
She's by herself. She's not with a group of friends. She's in like a rundown car, which is interesting considering how wealthy her parent is. But it tells us a lot about her as a character, for sure.
And as we talk about that intro, I think I'm just going to go ahead here and get into the plot. We can still talk about some of the characters and changes that happened from Taming of the Shrew to this. Cameron James, a new student at Padua High School in the Seattle area, immediately becomes smitten with beautiful and popular Bianca Stratford. Geeky Michael Ekman warns that she is vapid and conceited, and that her overprotective single father, Walter, an obstetrician worried about teenage pregnancy, does not allow her or her shrewish older sister, Kat, a senior, to date. Kat is accepted to Sarah Lawrence College in New York, but Walter wants her to stay close to home and attend his alma mater, the University of Washington. Bianca wishes to date affluent senior Joey Donner, but Walter will not allow his daughters to date until they graduate. Frustrated by Bianca's insistence and Kat's rebelliousness, Walter relents and declares that Bianca may date only when Kat does, knowing that Kat's antisocial attitude will greatly complicate it. When Cameron asks Bianca out, she informs him of her father's new rule and suggests he find someone to date Kat so that she can freely date Joey. He selects Australian bad boy Patrick Verona, who initially frightens him with his attitude. Michael assists by convincing Joey to pay Patrick to take Kat out, believing that it will allow Joey to date Bianca. Patrick agrees to the deal, but Kat initially rebuffs his first few advances. After Michael and Cameron assist him by probing Bianca for information on Kat's preferences, Patrick begins to win Kat's interest. She goes to a party with him, which enables Bianca to tag along, greatly upsetting Walter.
So many smart things here we can touch on.
I like the idea that Kat rebuffs Patrick. In the story, in the Shakespeare story, Petruchio shows up and immediately says, I'm going to marry you. This is how it's going to be. And then her father quickly says, great, marry her. Yeah, that's what he wants to do. And there's like this transactional nature to that. I like that in this scenario, Kat rebuffs him, doesn't have time for his bullshit, doesn't believe that he is who he says he is, kind of sees him as like a burnout dirtbag kind of person. And then like over the course of him attempting to pursue her, he obviously has been paid to do so, and that becomes a major plot element. But you can see that he's like finding her to be interesting and someone who's like intentional about the way she lives her life, and that's like endearing in a culture that I think this is commenting on, of people who are very superficial and people who are very quick to join trends and things that are popular.
Yeah, they're both counterculture kind of people, right? Like, he is considered this bad boy. There's a lot of funny rumors going around about him being in San Quentin, or he ate a whole duck once, and like really funny off the wall shit that these rumors about him, that he was in porn for a year or something. Like, this is just a lot of funny stuff. And I love what this sets up, and I'll go ahead and talk about it now, what I think is a really smart inversion in the way that you're going to use this plot line in a way that still feels like, honestly, it feels like the only way you can use this plot line today and have it make any sense, right? So he agrees to take money in order to try and pursue her, in sort of a cynical, like, yeah, sure, I'll take some money, whatever, I'll give it a go. And then genuinely begins to have feelings for her, and that acceptance of money becomes a looming plot element that we know at some point she's going to find out he took this money, and it's going to be a problem. It's going to be it's going to make him look really bad, right? It's going to potentially blow up this romance we're starting to build. Also, in the course of it, he is the one who is being tamed. You could argue he is this bad boy smoker, doesn't give a shit about most people, and we see him at first start to play act like he's different. Like, he's like, oh, I'll pretend like I'm not smoking. I'll pretend like I read feminist literature. I'll pretend like I like this music. He's sort of cosplaying as this character that he thinks she'll like. Over time, we see that like maybe some of those are things that he's pretending to be are wearing off on him or rubbing off on him, and are starting to become part of who he actually is. And so if any character is said to like really start to change, it would be him. And so it's almost like she tames him in a reversal of what we would typically imagine from this story.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, it's like, I think they are finding a balance of like changing each other, but I do like the idea of the inversion, right? Like here, she very much is able to like stay in her convictions, and it seems that she's going to, all the things that she's going to do along the way, she's going to go to this university. She's going to remain the type of person she is in terms of like not doing something just because others feel like, well, she does have like maybe a moment of weakness here or there. She's not doing things because the culture and people are telling her to, which is like definitely the inversion to what we get in that story, the Shakespeare story, because at the end of it, she succumbs to everything society is expecting of her, if you're reading it on the surface level of that not being sarcasm, which it's hard. I don't know. It's hard not to find a little sarcasm in it, but also like it seems like it's played for real.
Yeah, we talk about that in our last episode, which you'll have to listen to if you want to know our thoughts on that. But I think the accepted sort of look at it is it's given earnestly. So I like that it uses that plot line in a smart way, right? Like, it uses it to create this drama in a teen comedy setting. We see lots of references, which we should probably at least nod to a few of them. Like, Patrick Verona is the name of this character, who is the stand-in for Petruchio, who was from Verona, Italy. So the reason they use that, even Katerina here, her last name's Stratford, and I read that that's a reference to Stratford upon Avon, where Shakespeare was born. So there's some cool little things like that. And there's a lot of stuff like that. Like, there's just names that are Shakespearean, and places that are Shakespearean. Yeah.
Name of the high school, Padua.
Yeah,
obviously,
that's like the fictional town that the play took place in. What about we got baby Joseph Gordon-Levitt here? He looks like he's about 13.
He does, yeah. Freshman in high school. I'm like, I don't buy it. He looks young. And that's something I wanted to bring up is like, this is an era when they didn't have 30-year-olds as high schoolers. And that works for me. I'm like,
although I will say,
Heath Ledger.
Heath Ledger does seem too old. He seems like he's in his 20s, but at least they kind of acknowledge that, because they say that like there's some mysterious years, like maybe he got held back. We see him like smoking and drinking at a bar, and it doesn't seem like he's not allowed to be there. It seems like they're like saying, yeah, he's 21. He can be in this bar just smoking and drinking. So I think he just got held back or something, and the implication is probably like from moving from country to country and place to place, he ended up having to repeat a few grades. So he's older than he should be.
You were mentioning some of the references, and I just wanted to name a few of the lines that some characters deliver. Cameron says, "I burn, I pine, I perish," which is a direct quote from Taming of the Shrew. That happens at the very beginning.
And when he delivers it, it's a little awkward, but later we see that he has an affinity for Shakespeare, and so it kind of like retroactively makes it make sense that he says that.
And it's interesting that he's teaching her French while the tutor in the Shakespeare play was Latin, right? He was posing as a Latin.
Yeah, it's kind of
teacher.
like a nod to that, even though it's quite a different scenario. That's Cameron with Bianca, and so Bianca, and also I thought like Bianca's sort of storyline ended up being even sort of rescued in a sense, because Bianca was kind of vapid and not very interesting in the play, and this version of Bianca begins that way, but over time seems like becomes a little more interesting, which we'll return to as we move on in the plot. But it was cool. The seeds are being laid here early, and again, I wasn't like fully in love yet, but I was open to it, and I think that's the way to go in watching this movie.
All right, so the next bit of plot here. At the party, Kat becomes upset upon seeing Bianca with Joey and responds by getting intoxicated. Patrick attends to her, and she starts to open up to him, expressing her interest in forming a band. When Kat attempts to kiss him, Patrick pulls away, causing her to depart infuriated. Meanwhile, Bianca upsets Cameron by ignoring him for Joey, but soon realizes that Joey is indeed shallow and self-absorbed. When she asks Cameron to drive her home, he admits his feelings for her are indeed genuine, and her treatment of him has frustrated him, and she reconciliatorily kisses him in response. Joey offers to pay Patrick to take Kat to the prom so he can take Bianca. He initially refuses, but relents when Joey offers him more money. Although Kat is still angry with Patrick, he eventually wins her over by serenading her, accompanied by the Padua High School Marching Band with a performance of Can't Take My Eyes Off of You by Frankie Valli, and she returns the favor by assisting him in sneaking out of detention. Their subsequent date turns romantic, but Kat becomes suspicious when Patrick insists that she accompany him to the prom, which she adamantly opposes.
A lot to touch on there. One thing I want to highlight before we move into more important things is just that one element that we saw a lot in the play was characters play acting like they're someone they're not, right? Like there's a lot of people like putting on disguises, and it gets really goofy, right? One element where I felt like that was being portrayed in this film was every adult character, and definitely every adult teacher and person at the school, they all felt like they did not belong there. Like they all felt like they weren't actually teachers. They were just pretending to be them. In hilarious ways, and it really humanized them for me, and like it showed like another side of teachers that you just don't often see, and just in really funny ways. Like all of them were basically like cursing and like not really behaving the ways that you're expected to in front of your class. But then we had the romance writer, guidance counselor. We had the detention guy who was leading the detention, like confiscating the weed and then like confiscating the Cheetos too. It was really funny, and like
the English teacher is like my favorite. I love the way that he navigates the class, and he's like, "Fuck you," also, I'm not having any of your shit, Kat. Like, go to the principal's office all the time, even when she's being genuine.
Yeah, and she's like trying to bring up feminist stuff, and he's like, "Oh, tell me about it, rich white girl." Like that was funny too.
Yep. It's pretty biting satire. It's pretty good. I like this would continue on too. I think you can see with other films that would come on, like Mean Girls continues this sort of trend of like the teachers being a bit like unhinged as well, and like some of the commentary.
So what this also like played into for me was I realized that we were in sort of an elevated reality. Like the reality of this movie is not quite ours. It's like borders ours, but we're actually in almost that, like, how like if you go watch like a Shakespearean comedy, it's kind of in this elevated place where everything is being kind of played up for comedic effect, and it felt that way too, where like reality is comedic. Some guy getting shot with an arrow, that's funny. You know what I mean? Like stuff like this is funny because we're in a comedic world. We're in a place where all of the teachers are kind of strange bozos with like weird things going on. Like the father becomes more endearing when you look at it that way, because like a real character like this would maybe be very frustrating and like potentially very toxic, but it's like, oh, but he's doing it from a place of love, and we're in this kind of fun world where we can look at it as just like he's being overprotective, and yet he's also like leaning into this Shakespeare character, so we're okay with it.
I also think like the heightened nature of the world also owes to the fact that it's like taking place in high school, when you as an individual feel like everything is heightened. It's more dramatic, it's more comedic, things that maybe aren't that funny. exasperated. Like you're going to extend that out and feel.
Well,
like
and it makes the performance that Heath Ledger puts on, that Patrick puts on, work even better too, right? Like we buy it. And we buy that it's cool, that it's effective.
Like when you're performing Can't Take My Eyes Off You in a stadium full of people and you've hired a marching band, that plays off cool, and it now highly iconic scene. I mean,
very
like,
iconic.
Even if,
yeah, this
even
is
if
the
you haven't
scene.
seen the film,
I had seen this scene.
Yeah. Even if you haven't seen the film, you've seen the scene, and you understand what's going on based on the context. And like, it is that big gesture that I think a lot of, especially like women of this era are interested in, like a romantic gesture. It, harkens back to like romance novels in a sense, or romance stories.
Yeah.
And I think that like that, it works so well, and it works. He just like is incredibly charming, and like to put yourself out there, become vulnerable, to sing, to perform, to dance around like that, and something that's not very in vogue when in a time in like 99 when everything was like, oh, you care about something, that's not cool at all, like that kind of vibe. And like someone who is willing to do these kinds of things and put themselves out there, I think was really endearing for the character, and it works for obviously Kat here.
Yeah. And it's again, this is a romance. And we have to like embrace that. Like that makes us fall in love with the character. It makes Julia Stiles fall in love with the character, Kat Strafford. And it all works in that way. I want to embrace the romance. We're very close to Valentine's Day. We can lean into it.
I mean, it works for me. I've already said that. I like this film a lot, and I've honestly, I feel the same coming out of it that I did on my memory of it.
Yeah. But when you watched it originally, did you know it was an adaptation? I bet that's a whole new element you've brought to it now, right?
It's a great point.
'Cause that was the same thing with Clueless. I had seen Clueless before, but I had no idea what it was doing, and that sort of other level.
Yeah, which is really fun and quite clever.
It brings a lot to it. Yeah, I think I would have liked this movie. I don't think I would have loved it. And I think knowing as much as I do about it being an adaptation, it really unlocks like another tier for this movie for me.
Especially because I think it's like, to jump ahead a little bit to our end of the episode evaluations, I think it's improving on something that wasn't working so much. I think it's doing a lot of things to like change, alter.
It might have been working for the time, but not for us.
Yeah, not for us.
Yeah.
And this film does like, it's, I mean, at this point it came out 25 years ago almost, and like, so we're 25 years on, and it still feels like there's like a modern sensibility to it. We've got like a character that everyone can rally around, and really became an iconic sort of figure for I think, I don't know, I would say like some counterculture and like women empowerment and feminism, and that being seen as cool. And I think that's always something that's important to put forward, and like, props to this movie for kind of sneaking that into audiences in 99, in my opinion, and kind of maybe setting the culture up for a lot of where we saw it go from here. Along the same lines of what I was just talking about too, like it being important to the culture and in general, like the music, and I think the design and the dress that people are wearing would, like, you can look at this as a time capsule, as I said earlier. Like, it's like you see all of that, and you can see some of like what maybe is coming back around in a crazy way as these trends, sort of like fashion trends and musical trends, kind of come and go. And like, we're old enough now to where like this is kind of coming back around for a much younger generation, and just seeing that is quite cool. But like, I read that the costume designer Kim Tillman designed original dresses for Larissa Oleynik and Julia Stiles. Larissa Oleynik is Bianca, as well as the period outfits for Susan May Pratt and David Krumholtz, who are wearing those sort of like Shakespearean outfits near the end of the film, which we can talk about. And as far as the music's concerned, the reviewers of the time were saying it's, quote, one of the best modern rock soundtracks of the spring of 1999 season. So in representing the music of the time, you have like Letters to Cleo is one of the bands that performs and appears.
Yeah, that's like her favorite band, right? Letters to Cleo?
I think so, yeah. And they're covering like Cheap Trick songs and Nick Lowe songs, and like, so like remixing those songs and bringing them into relevance for this younger demographic with the more modern band.
What a cool moment when they go to that, like, it's like a nightclub or something, but it's like a show, and it's just so 90s. It reminds me of like so many scenes out of like Buffy, where they would just all go hang after school at this like bar where they always had a live band playing. It was like, it's so unreal, but so cool. Like it feels like it could be like, should be real, even if it's not.
In some weird way. Yeah. And I think people were seeking that out after shows like that. And this movie came out, right? Club Skunk was the name of that club. And yeah, it's like, that looks like somewhere you go in your mid-20s with like all this neon and
not a bunch of high schoolers. Yeah.
Right. But I mean, it's fun to think about.
Well, and it's like, I said this to my wife. I was like, it's so funny they're having like a live band at prom. I don't know about you, man, but that definitely never happened. It was always a DJ.
Got that DJ going.
Maybe if you go to Padua High, in Tacoma, whatever it's really called. I think it's called like Stadium High School or something lame. But maybe they do live bands. Maybe it's like a rich person thing. We didn't grow up in the wealthy high schools where you can have a live band.
I got more of the middle class experience.
Yeah. There was one funny scene where I think it was Bianca was meeting with Cameron, and they go to where the Seattle Troll is, which I don't know if you've ever been to, but it's really cool.
No, I've heard of it. I haven't been there.
I've been there, yeah. I went and saw that one time when I was in Seattle, and it was cool to see it there, and like it looks a little different because, obviously 25 years ago. But they had a really funny conversation where her evidence she gives that Katerina is not a lesbian is that she has a picture of Jared Leto in her nightstand. And it sent me down this rabbit hole because I was like, 1999? That was the year Fight Club came out. Like, how big of a star was Jared Leto that he would be a name you could just drop and people would know what that means? Because 30 Seconds to Mars hadn't even released an album yet, from what I was reading. They had formed, but they hadn't released an album yet. So I found what it was, and you might be able to call it, because I didn't know about this. But he was on a show called My So-Called Life. Which I think was a big show for like teenagers who would have been around the age of the ideal demographic for this movie. So I bet a lot of people would have known who Jared Leto was from My So-Called Life, is my assumption. But he was also interesting because he was considered a pretty boy, and that was like so she likes pretty boys.
I've heard people talk about that show, and I know like exactly the type of person who was super into him because of that. But I was wondering if this was like it must have been before Requiem for a Dream, because that was like
I think so.
That era.
Yeah, that's why I was like, he couldn't have been a big star. And it was interesting that you could name drop him like that. But then I was like, I think it's just specific to teenagers would have known.
It's crazy that he's had like multiple decades of relevance now at this point.
Yeah,
it's
well, and now
like,
he's like basically a cult leader. So
sounds like it. Yeah,
yeah.
That's his 2020's goal, is he wants to get the cult going.
Yeah, it also led to a really funny scene where they tell that to Heath Ledger, and he has this moment where he's like, "You don't think I'm a pretty boy," or he said, "You don't think I'm pretty," or something. And the whole time I was like, yeah, how can you say that to Heath Ledger? This is one of the prettiest guys you've ever seen. like look at him. Oh, she likes pretty boys. Okay, well, perfect. You picked one. I mean, yes, he's supposed to be kind of like a badass, but like, come on.
Well, in this world, he's not Jared Leto, apparently. But
yes.
People who are attracted to Jared Leto around that era were probably attracted to Heath Ledger.
Oh,
so yeah, it's kind of a
silly
observation. A silly observation for them to make.
I know we talked about this a little bit in A Knight's Tale, but that was one of the things that was funny when he got announced as the Joker for The Dark Knight. Everybody was mad because they were like, how can this pretty boy play the Joker? And so like that was his sort of observation, like what people thought of him as.
Well, that and like Brokeback Mountain was previous to this. So people were like, there's a lot of different sides of people who were kind of conflicted about that. Yeah, but it is funny that he became the pretty boy that this film is saying that he wasn't.
Well, maybe it knew he was.
Yeah.
But for a moment, it pretends like he's not. It's just funny how it kind of plays into a weird Australian stereotype too, where it's like, oh, they're all criminals. I don't know if you know about, it's like the whole thing because like
the whole island, supposedly they sent prisoners there or whatever. Yeah,
the UK sent a bunch of criminals there, so there's still this long-standing implication that if you're Australian you're a criminal, but it seems like a weird, quaint stereotype these days to me, and the fact that it's in this movie is just kind of funny.
So we talked about that iconic sequence in the bleachers, and he's performing "Can't Take My Eyes Off of You," and but I did read that they filmed only 3 takes of that. That's all they had.
Wow.
And clearly they got it from multiple different angles and everything they needed, but the song for the scene changed multiple times. It was very close to being "I Touch Myself" by Australian rock band Divinals.
Okay, yeah, that's a different mood.
It would have been much more feel like intense if it was that sexual.
It would have been funny. I could see it that way too.
This one just works really well. There's something about like the like.
It's kind of old. It's kind of like such a older throwback song.
Exactly.
So I thought it was kind of an interesting choice. but it works for that reason, yeah, because it's something that everybody knows, I guess.
Kind of, yeah. And it's also like
It's a little bit silly.
It's sweet, it's silly.
It's
and
like
then
if you were to
also,
go
like,
to karaoke today and sing a song from, the 60s, like some ballad like this. Like it's like
Yeah.
it's like kind of like, yeah, you're doing this throwback thing that everybody kind of knows.
I think something that was important in the 90s and also important to this day is like someone showing their musical taste, like they're showing a lot of themselves to you. And like a high schooler knowing this song, I think is showing like a fairly developed sense of taste in music, different kind of varieties of music. And for him to perform this one specifically, I feel like that's definitely something that you develop into in like your 20s and 30s of thinking of a song like this, which kind of to me just speaks of like the writers choosing a good song for him to perform, not a teenager being like, this will be the one to perform.
I agree.
For sure.
And it shows that one of the things they bond over is music. It shows that he cares about music and he likes music, which, hell yeah, I'm there for it, man. Music was so important for me at that age. It was like,
absolutely,
one of the main things I cared about in life. One thing that I just had to look it up because I was like, I knew this was going to be true. Can't Take My Eyes Off of You came out in 1967. So that was 32 years before this movie comes out in 99. So that go back in time from where we are now.
Yep.
That's that would be what? So 2025, so that would be 1993. So songs from the mid 90s would be as old as Can't Take My Eyes Off of You was when this movie came out.
So basically, if it's made today, they're performing a Bare Naked Ladies song on the bleachers.
Basically.
Yeah.
Time. All right, anyway.
Oh, man. All right, let's get into this last bit of plot here.
Yeah.
Irritated at not being asked to prom by Cameron, Bianca accepts Joey's invitation, but Walter declines to allow it unless Kat accompanies her. Kat confesses to Bianca that she dated Joey when they were freshmen and, succumbing to peer pressure, had sex with him, later regretting it. After Joey dumped her, she vowed against doing anything out of peer pressure. Bianca insists that she can decide her own life, so Kat agrees to attend the prom with Patrick, and Bianca decides to go with Cameron instead of Joey. At the prom, Bianca learns that Joey planned to have sex with her that night. Angry that Bianca has spurned him for Cameron, Joey reveals his arrangement with Patrick, which causes Kat to leave heartbroken. Joey then shoves Michael and punches Cameron, but Bianca then assaults him for having hurt her, Kat, and Cameron. Bianca and Cameron share another kiss. The following day, Bianca reconciles with Kat and begins dating Cameron. Comfortable that Kat can handle herself, Walter permits her to attend Sarah Lawrence College. For an assignment in which the students were tasked to write their own versions of William Shakespeare's Sonnet 141, Kat reads aloud a poem she composed entitled 10 Things I Hate About You, revealing that she still loves and cares for Patrick. He surprises her with a Fender Stratocaster that he bought with the money Joey paid him and confesses that he has fallen for her. Kat forgives him and they reconcile with a kiss.
So one of the things I kept wondering if they were going to do, we had covered the play, and I was like, at the end of the play, she comes out and she gives this big speech where she's like, this is what a good wife does. And we had this whole debate about whether or not it was delivered earnestly, or was it supposed to be taken as sarcastic or comedic in some way, or like, how are we supposed to feel about this? And I'm like, are they going to have a big scene like this? And like, I still wonder if there may have been a way they could have done it, but instead they decided to not do it at all. And instead it gets replaced with this poem, which ends up lending itself to the title of the movie. And what they do cleverly, though, is that the poem and what she does with it is the same thing that the entire movie is doing with the play from Shakespeare. So the assignment is to take a Shakespearean sonnet and change it into a poem of your own. And so she does this, and she takes this Shakespearean sonnet, which like I couldn't remember exactly, but I knew there was one that was essentially laying out all the things that the narrator of the poem does not like about a person, but then reaffirming how much it means they care about them at the end in like broad strokes. And I'm not sure if that's exactly the one that is assigned or not. I'd have to look that up, but like, I know there is a Shakespeare sonnet that does that. And to me, that's the one that she's changed into this 10 Things I Hate About You poem. And so it's cool because in that way, it's doing the same thing that the movie you're watching is doing. And I thought that was really clever, and it kind of lands because of this heightened reality where we're in this space where like something like this, it's another big grand gesture, sort of in kind. Yeah, I don't know. I really liked it. I was a little like disappointed because I would have thought it would have been really interesting to see what they would have done, and like we could have talked about how they they did their own spin on this scene, but instead they just kind of avoid it and do that. But it was cool still in its own way.
Mostly because like that's what didn't land for either of us too. Like
it's all leading to this thing, and this thing is like, bleh. Like I don't know, it didn't do anything for us. Yeah.
Right. And so like I guess I understand changing that and then tying it into the larger Shakespeare work I think is cool, even if it's outside of Taming of the Shrew, because that's like what you can do as a modern audience is like tie all of his works together in a sense, or at least reference them in some.
And they do that already with the romance. Like they're already saying like, yes, we're using Taming of the Shrew as our most prominent influence, but really this is like trying to take a teen rom-com and make it a Shakespearean rom-com in a way, right? Like and kind of elevate everything to these grandiose levels.
Yeah, and it works. I think it works pretty well.
It works great actually.
I want to note like one of the things that this does that became more modern and I think effective for the time period, and that's that like this pressure to have sex that Bianca and Kat kind of talk about, and Kat talks about how she was like society expected it of her in a sense, or at least Joey did, and by association all of society, men, really patriarchy, and then she does it and regrets it and then realizes like that's a growth there in her character that we haven't seen, and that's kind of led her to where she is now.
That was a cool moment because to me it like really shows that the women who wrote this screenplay knew what they're doing. It really sells this sister relationship. It puts it front and center, and yeah, we see a character who's the main love interest admit to having a sexual relationship with the main villainous dumb jock that we have grown to hate throughout this movie. And that is a bold thing to do and believe that your audience is going to follow you. But I think they do, and I think we do. And I love that it is able to work because we have established that she is not supposed to be the cookie cutter protagonist of this movie. She is already unusual. And so it fits, I think. And it also explains a lot of her behavior, I think, too.
In terms of like a modern movie, too, I think it sells a lot of cool relationships. Like the relationship between the sister, you understand why she's protective.
Yeah.
You understand she doesn't want her to make the same decisions, but then ultimately does allow her to make the same, whatever decision she wants
because
to.
She thinks that all of this is about Joey when really it ends up becoming more about Cameron.
Right. And then ultimately allows her to make her own decisions, and she can kind of learn from Kat's mistakes, and Kat can grow as a character and find someone who truly cares about her, which is like, again, kind of counter to that Shakespeare story where it's not someone who cares about her. He does not love her. And in this case, she's finding someone who loves her for her and the things that she's been through. And in the same token, like you said, kind of transforming Patrick into someone who better represents kind of what she's interested in.
And that conversation is a brilliant stroke of storytelling for multiple reasons. And one of the things it does, too, is it also really, rehabilitates Bianca as a character for me because we care about their relationship. And then at the dance, when Joey confronts Cameron, it is Bianca who punches him in the moment that we're used to in these sorts of movies where, like, famously this would be Marty McFly punching Biff in this scenario. But instead it's Bianca sort of coming in and avenging her sister to some extent, but then also sticking up for the guy that she likes.
Right.
It's just a really smart inversion of that. So we're playing in this space with these very well-known tropes, and instead of like casting it aside, you change it a little bit and have Bianca be the one to take that action.
Yeah, and speaking of tropes, like this idea of, and especially a rom-com, maybe romance in general, like you have obviously them falling in love, that rising action, and then you have that like crashing defeat of like some conflict, something's going to come into play.
Yeah.
And so they have
revealed the payment.
It's revealed that the payment, and then she leaves, and like I do like this idea that like that doesn't mean that she doesn't have feelings for him, and that's addressed kind of in her 10 Things I Hate About You moment. The way that she leaves, he is like and I'll just say I think Patrick navigates a few things fairly well in the story that make him an endearing character. He doesn't kiss her when she's drunk, when she attempts to. He like
I interpret that as he also was maybe feeling a bit guilty about having accepted money.
I think so too. Yeah. I agree. But again, makes him seem like a better person to me.
Drunk and probably concussed.
Yeah, he doesn't attempt to like chase her down or force her to be with him. In this romantic gesture, there's this moment of breathing in the film where you think maybe she's just going to go off to college and have had this this relationship with him, but it's not working out, and it's like you grow up and you move on, and the film like lets you linger in that for a little bit. But everyone who wants the romance story element, they're like, they have to get back together. What's gonna happen? And I love that like she is the motivation for that, like that she comes back around to kind of let him know, and his reaction to it is it's genuine, like it's pretty heartfelt, and I think a lot of that works really really well. And I'd give credit to the performance, the writers, and the director here.
Yeah, and you just reminded me of The Party, which we kind of glossed over, but I think it's such, again, this is very much like The Club. This is a idealized, mythical version of a house party that occurs in high school, and it's really funny because I think it's during the credits, they're showing different like takes and like they're like outtakes or something, and they show that like how this was filmed essentially, and it's like everybody's in silence, just like shuffling around, dancing, and there's no music playing, and it just like underscores how like all these scenes always feel weird. And it's like, yeah, they didn't play any music, so they probably didn't know what song they were even going to use, so they're just like, have everybody dance, and we'll add song later, we'll figure it out later. In
addition to like what songs they can get the rights to that they can actually play in the film,
and we want to make sure that our actors can hear each other and everything, so everybody's just like awkwardly dancing in the background to silence. It's like, it's gonna look weird.
And really the thing that's the most important is they need to get clean dialogue audio from the actors. Like they can't have music sort of tainting that. So it has to be clean.
That house party is so funny because like they're able to lean into that unreality of it, right? Like it's this like over the top goofy guy who like wants everybody to be really gentle with everything, and then someone smashes in the door carrying in speakers, and there's immediately a party in like 3 seconds that has filled the entire house, and it's like it's goofy, right? It's unreality, but it really has a charm to it.
Yeah, the scene from Animal House with Shout, the famous scene with like the togas and they're all shout shout, at one point they actually reference that song plays for a little bit. I don't know if it's in the party, but this plays as that, but that's a college party from the 70s, and this is a high school party where like it's become a trope, I think, spawning out of that kind of Animal House party where like everything's getting trashed. Mm-hmm. People are coming in to your house, messing with your belongings, fucking everything up, and then there's that character who's like, oh no guys, everybody stop.
Yeah.
And so like that, countless high school sort of party.
It's like so. It's such
I've represented that.
It's so fun though, in a sense. Like especially like I don't know. I can see the writers having fun with it, looking back at it, and like me now thinking back about it. It's like, no, I never had anything like that, but that still exists as a thing in all of our collective consciousness as we think back about being in that era, like being in high school. It blends into college a little bit, but just like the monumental house party where some sort of romantic like beat happened, whatever it was, like. It's just it's a thing. I don't know. It's got a charm to it.
Maybe again, this is that elevated nature. Maybe this is an exaggeration of a party. Like I think that it always feels bigger to you when you're in the moment and when you're younger and you don't have the context. So this party is like an embellishment of like a party that you would go to in high school, and it represents that.
Of all these parties,
And then people, in high school watching it, it's almost like a party to strive for, a party to try to emulate. You're like, oh, we gotta have a 10 Things I Hate About You party.
And then one thing we return to at the end is like this money, which has been this sort of like, I don't know, unresolved thing. It's like, what did he do with the money? And I thought that he had just paid off the band, and that was like all the money, but I guess he had some funds left over. And at the end, he's bought her, in another big gesture, he's bought her a Fender Stratocaster, which...
Yeah, badass guitar,
Great guitar. I don't think you could buy it, even in 1999, for less than $400, which is what we're assume he has left after everything.
I think we're meant to think that he took that money and some of his own money that he earned in other ways and spent it on her too.
I guess, although he wasn't implied to be well off, but we actually don't really know anything about like whether or not he has money. I guess so. Maybe he has some.
I just think
money.
He had some money on the outside too that he had, from other dates that he had gone on with other people at some point, or some other things that he'd been up to that got him money. But that Stratocaster is important to me just because like some of my favorite bands growing up were playing Fender Stratocasters for like punk bands and stuff like that. And like to see it that be the goal, or like that be the thing that he gave to her as a gift. And like you said, it was incredibly, like, I think there's multiple guitars that are shown, and that's like, it's 5, 6, 7 times more expensive than the other ones that are shown.
Yeah. It's very iconic for that kind of music, for sure. I was always a little more into like the Gibson Les Paul, was like my goal guitar. Like I loved the way that guitar looked, but yeah, definitely Stratocaster.
You didn't want like a flying V?
So in high school, I had an Explorer shaped, which if you've seen like Metallica play, it's the kind of shape that like James Hetfield played. I had an ESP Explorer shaped black guitar. That was quite cool. That was kind of my go-to. Anyway, would have loved to have, the more expensive guitars, but those are a little out of my price range. That's why I know that like, even like a Stratocaster would have probably been around $1,000.
I think it was definitely around that range. And I know like the Gibson Les Paul, as far as I ever knew, was like the
$2,000.
That was the one that everyone was like, that's the greatest guitar ever made. So.
Beautiful things, but I think we're well in the weeds now talking about guitars. I think it's time to come down with our judgment on whether or not we like the play or the movie better. I think it's pretty obvious for both of us, so I'm just going to go ahead and say this movie is way better than the play. I had a great time with it, and really for me, it's like this movie was better than I expected it to be. I think this is going to be in contention for maybe some of the best adaptations we covered this year. At the very least, most surprising. I expect this is one that I'm going to return to come December when we're making our deliberations about that for Last Looks. But I had a great time with this. Definitely enjoyed this movie. And thank you to the patrons for choosing it, because this was a Patreon selection.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And thank you to the patrons, obviously. You guys are great. It's iconic, right? Yeah. It's a cult classic now. It's the time capsule we've been talking about, the iconic performances, the I love you, I can't take my eyes off of you moment. Heath Ledger is now passed, and getting to see him in a film like this.
It was so bittersweet watching it, like, because it's such a cool moment, and like I love it, and it works so well on that level. But then like it really brought home the tragedy of having lost him, and like what we lost as a performer. Yeah. Like, so it's really hard to not also feel like a tinge of sadness while you're watching that performance.
Definitely. And I went on a sort of a rabbit hole with this. Like, he was 19 when he filmed this film, and
really?
He had a daughter around the time that he passed, and she is now 19.
Wow. Okay.
He passed at like 28 years old. So like it's so tragic to think of how much more time. It was 2007 or 2008 when he passed.
So young. That's insanely young. I didn't even realize he was that young. That's wild. That's like similar to like Kurt Cobain being like 26 and shit like that. Like it's wild.
And just like how many more years we could have had with him, and how long it's been since he's passed, and what a tragedy that is. But anyway, I obviously I'm going to take the film here. I just think like there's so much about this that's fun. While there's some dated things and things that are a bit rough around the edges, it makes for like one of the most fun sort of rom-com films from this era.
It's not enough to seriously tarnish this movie.
It's quite fun. I like the music a lot. I was always big into that era. I just props to the director, props to the screenwriters.
Such an interesting thing too, because it's like his major movie that he's known for, and it seems like he hasn't done like a whole lot else that we would know about. But I mean, if you're gonna have one thing, this is a good one. One interesting direction choice that really caught me by surprise is as we're like leaving for the credits, and we fly out to this like helicopter footage. I assume it was, and the band is playing on top of the roof of this actual school.
Yeah.
And I was like, badass. Holy shit, that had to have been like an expensive thing to set up. And it's all just for this like final shot. But I guess it really plays into that elevated reality thing, right? Where now we have a band playing on top of a school.
It was great. And they did you like multiple rotations around, and like a fast like sort of shot right across them, like over top into the ocean or the lake or whatever is there behind. It was really cool, and I thought, like, I guess they were like, we have some budget we need to blow, and so let's get the band up there.
We have some budget left over. That's
and they synced it pretty well. I was noticing the band was in time with the track playing and everything, so it looked great. And what a fun way to end the movie. And again, tying it all into music in that way. We've talked about the guitars. We've talked about like their relationship is kind of bonded around music, and music being so important at that time in your life, and in the 90s for us as well.
Yeah, totally works.
It's just. It works all really well.
So if you enjoyed this episode and you enjoyed our coverage of the Taming of the Shrew and this movie, make sure to like this video, leave a comment letting us know, and whatever app you're on, if you're listening as audio, make sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review.
Also, be sure to connect with us on social media: Facebook, Blue Sky, Instagram. We're also on Discord. We're all over the place. Our Discord server, if you'd like to join that, send us a message on any social media platform, or just send an email to inktofilm@gmail.com, and we would welcome you there. We talk about movies and books, games, recommendations, all kinds of stuff. Just come and hang out.
Yeah, we'd love to have you. If you'd like to support this podcast in another way, we have a Patreon. That's how this project was selected, was through our Patreon supporters. We'll be having another quarterly project coming up in a couple months. So if you want to have a shot at suggesting and voting for those dedicated polls, you're going to want to be on Patreon, where we also do monthly releases of bonus content. So if you've made it all the way here to the end, I'd love for you to let us know what the next Shakespearean project you'd like to hear us cover, because that's something I'm sure we'll come back to Shakespeare at some point. So do you want a more direct adaptation? What's your favorite play that you'd love to see us dive into? Because it's always rich, and it was a lot of fun to revisit. So I'd love to hear that from you. But that's going to be it for this week. So until next time,
keep adapting.